You wrote this? At my piano. The snobbish conductor held up her tattered sheet music like it was trash. Ava stood frozen, humiliated in front of the entire conservatory, mocked before she played a single note. But when her trembling hands touched the keys, what followed left the room in stunned silence. What they thought was a joke became a masterpiece. What they thought was weakness revealed unshakable strength. This is the unforgettable story of a poor girl with no training, no support, and no status, who played her truth so powerfully it changed lives, humbled critics, and echoed through international concert halls. But even as fame found her, Ava faced a deeper question. Could she stay true to her music, or would the world's expectations drown out her voice? Stay until the final note, because her last performance holds a twist you'll never forget. Now, before we dive deeper, please like and subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know what time and where you're watching from. Thank you so much. And now, let's get back to the story. You think this counts as a composition? The conductor's voice cracked through the hushed auditorium like a whip, sharp and unrelenting. His hand held a flimsy piece of sheet music, worn and folded, as though it had lived at the bottom of a bag for far too long. He dangled it with 2 fingers, like it carried the smell of something foul. From the stage below, the girl in the second-hand gray sweater and scuffed sneakers looked up. She didn't speak. Her fingers clutched the edge of the piano bench, white-knuckled. I asked you a question, Maestro Callahan continued, drawing out the syllables in his accent-soaked voice, his long coat swishing as he turned to the other musicians. She says she wrote this. Isn't that adorable? A few light laughs echoed from the orchestra pit. Nervous, controlled, the kind that came not from humor, but fear. Fear of being the next target. Ava swallowed hard. She had never been in a room this large. The cathedral ceilings towered above like judgmental eyes, the chandeliers glittering with crystals as if mocking the dull cotton of her clothes. She didn't belong here, and she knew it. The keyboard she practiced on at home was missing 2 middle octaves, and the pedals stuck. Still, she had come, because hope sometimes wears the disguise of foolishness. Callahan stepped closer, waving the paper like a flag of her inadequacy. This is not music. This is what happens when sentimentality replaces technique. You cannot fill concert halls with scribbles from your imagination. His words didn't sting so much as numb her, like a sudden winter wind through an open door. But she remained seated, gripping the edge of the bench like it anchored her to the earth. I wasn't trying to replace anything, she said softly, her voice barely more than a breath. What was that? Ava blinked. Her eyes darted across the room, dozens of eyes on her, none kind. The musicians wore black, pressed, elegant, polished. She wore a wrinkled skirt she'd ironed using a pot of boiling water the night before. Her coat, draped over the piano's side, still smelled faintly of wood smoke from their radiator-less apartment. I just wanted to play it, just once. Callahan scoffed. Out of the kindness of my heart, I allowed amateurs to audition, not hobos with dreams. He turned, preparing to wave in the next candidate. Her chance, like the paper in his hand, was about to be tossed aside. Then a voice rose from the pit, low, clear, defiant. Let her play. Callahan froze. The orchestra turned. Daniel, the first cellist, hadn't raised his voice, but it didn't need raising. It carried, like a bow pulled taut. Callahan's brow lifted, insulted. Excuse me? She came all this way. 1 minute won't kill us. The conductor's jaw flexed. 1 minute is an eternity when wasted. But then, to the room's surprise, he smirked. Fine, entertain us, little girl. Your 1 minute begins now. He tossed the paper. It fluttered to the floor like a falling leaf. Ava's legs trembled as she adjusted on the bench. She looked down at the keys like a soldier staring at a battlefield. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought they must all hear it. Her fingers hovered, stilled. The first note came, too soft, too shy, and died the moment it touched the air. Callahan exhaled in theatrical boredom. One of the second violins coughed, muttering something under his breath. Her fingers flinched back. She could walk away, say thank you and disappear. Go back to the echoing apartment, to her father, whose blind eyes would never see this failure. She could whisper that she tried, and never tell him how badly it went. But instead, she remembered something. Her father, cradling a coffee mug with both hands, had once told her, Music isn't perfect. It's pain you sculpt into something others can feel. If it doesn't tremble a little when it starts, it probably isn't real. Her hands returned to the keys. This time the sound was different. The melody unfolded slowly, like dawn breaking through mist. Hesitant but honest. Her fingers found the notes not through calculation, but by memory. Not of technique, but of feeling. She played the way her father used to hum to her when she had fevers. She played the way the cracked window used to whistle during winter, and the way the sun felt on her face when they had no power but still danced in the kitchen. She played everything that had no words. The laughter stopped. The rustling stopped. Callahan's hand, which had been half raised in dismissal, froze in the air. The music wasn't complex. No lightning-fast arpeggios, no grand crescendos. But it spoke, softly at first, like it was unsure it had the right. Then louder, with trembling courage. The orchestra didn't know what to do. Some leaned forward, others held still, afraid a breath would break the moment. Ava's eyes were closed now. She wasn't in the auditorium anymore. She was home. She was 8 years old again, her dad tapping rhythm on her back as she lay curled up beside the broken radiator. She was in every corner of her life, reliving each note, each bruise, each sliver of light. The final chords hovered, delicate and aching. The last note she held just long enough to say goodbye, not to them, but to the fear. She opened her eyes slowly. Silence. Long, thick, paralyzing silence. Then, well, Callahan muttered, breaking it with a cold shrug, that was emotional. His voice sounded strange now, smaller, defensive. She can go now. He turned his back and motioned for the next musician, but no one moved. Ava didn't move. Daniel, seated in the front row, stood up. His cello still rested beside him, untouched, his gaze locked on the conductor. Why are you afraid of what she just did? Callahan stiffened. Afraid? You mock her because you couldn't do what she did if you tried. You've forgotten why music exists. Gasps rippled across the room. Callahan turned, his voice sharp and loud now, regaining authority like a whip being snapped. This is my rehearsal. I don't answer to second-rate cellists with bleeding hearts. But Daniel didn't back down. Maybe not, but you should answer to the silence you felt just now. That silence? That's what awe sounds like. Callahan's face darkened. Ava, still seated at the piano, looked around. Something was shifting. She didn't understand it yet, only that something in the room felt different. No longer cold. Not because of warmth, because of fire, and it had started with her fingertips. For a long moment, the grand piano stood in stillness, as if even it was recovering from what had just passed through its keys. Ava sat frozen, hands limp in her lap, her heart pounding in the strange silence. No applause, no ridicule, just the weight of something unspoken, hovering like dust in a sunbeam. Maestro Callahan, flustered beneath the stoicism he wore like a second skin, adjusted his collar. His voice broke the spell first, dry and theatrical. Well, she certainly played something. A few orchestra members stirred, shifting in their seats, but none dared echo his laughter this time. They looked at Ava and then at each other. Something unnameable passed between them. Like a current, a recognition. The girl who'd come in with nothing had left them with something they couldn't explain. I assume you've made your point, Callahan said, not to Ava, but to Daniel, whose arms were now crossed defiantly across his chest. Now can we resume with actual musicians? Daniel's voice was calm but edged with something deeper than frustration. Sorrow, maybe. You keep calling them actual musicians, but you don't seem to remember what music is. Callahan stepped down from the podium. I won't tolerate this insubordination from you or anyone else who confuses emotional indulgence with discipline. Music is about structure, mastery, not pity performances. Ava winced at the word pity. I didn't ask for pity, she said, her voice soft but clear, startling even herself. Callahan glanced over, disinterested. I wrote that piece for my father, she continued. He used to play when I was a child. Before the tremors in his hands took that away. He listens to music now the way people listen to the rain. That's what I was trying to give him. Something in her tone silenced the room again. It wasn't a defense, it was a truth. Unadorned and vulnerable. The director of strings, a silver-haired woman in a plum scarf, tilted her head as if hearing a tune from far away. Another violinist lowered his bow and set it gently on the stand. Callahan, meanwhile, only scoffed. Lovely sentiment. Perhaps you should write Hallmark cards instead. We have real performances to prepare. He turned to Daniel. You're dismissed for today. The command hit like a slap, but Daniel didn't move. I'm not leaving, he said quietly. Not until someone says what we all felt. Callahan blinked. You're overstepping. Daniel took a breath. Then I'll step again. He turned to the orchestra. We spend our lives in rehearsal rooms, learning the precision of Bach and Brahms. We measure every note, dissect every breath, and that's beautiful. But somewhere along the way, we've forgotten what it means to feel awe. She reminded us. The conductor's fists clenched at his sides. This is not a student council debate, Mr. Reyes. But Daniel kept going, this time addressing the whole room. Didn't you feel it? That moment where everything paused, like the music was breathing for us? The silence that followed was heavier now, but no longer uncomfortable. One by one, small affirmations came. The second violinist nodded. A young flutist murmured, I've never cried in rehearsal before. The percussionist, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and calloused hands, whispered, It was like hearing my mother's voice again. Callahan stared in disbelief. What is wrong with all of you? This was a gimmick, a sympathy performance. You're letting your hearts override your heads. But he no longer held the room. Ava stood slowly, not out of pride, but to relieve the pressure in her legs. Her knees felt unsteady, and her palms were slick with sweat. She hadn't come here to spark rebellion. She had just wanted to be heard. Just once. I'm sorry, she said suddenly, looking to the director. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I can go. No. The voice that stopped her was firm and unfamiliar. From the back of the hall, footsteps echoed against the marble. A woman in her early 60s, composed, elegant, with silver curls pulled into a low chignon, walked forward with slow authority. The director. She hadn't been introduced. Ava had assumed she wasn't even present. But now, every musician rose to attention. Even Callahan's posture stiffened. I've been here the whole time, the woman said, her voice rich with quiet power, and I've seen everything I need to see. She paused in front of Ava, looking her up and down, not with judgment, but with unsettling clarity, as though she were reading not her appearance, but her soul. What's your name? Ava? She whispered. Ava Lauren. Miss Lauren. The director took a breath. That was one of the most honest performances I've heard in decades. Ava swallowed hard. Thank you, ma'am, she said, stunned. But the woman wasn't finished. She turned to Maestro Callahan. And you have just embarrassed this institution. Callahan's face flushed crimson. Excuse me? You humiliated a young woman before she played a single note. You dismissed her as garbage before she touched the keys. And when the music humbled you, you ridiculed it again to maintain your illusion of control. He took a step forward, fuming. I've built this orchestra, this conservatory. I've earned my authority. Which you just lost. Her words were quiet, but final. Gasps escaped from the musicians. The temperature in the room dropped. You can't be serious, Callahan stammered. I've never been more serious, she said, turning her back on him. Pack your scores. You are no longer welcome on this podium. For a moment, he looked as if he might speak, might shout, argue, reclaim the stage. But no one supported him. Not a single violin lifted in protest. Not a bow moved. He walked out alone. The heavy door closed behind him with a sound that echoed far longer than any note Ava had played. The director exhaled, then turned back to the young girl still standing by the piano, eyes wide and hands trembling. Miss Lauren, she said gently, if you're willing, I'd like to offer you a position. Not as a student, but as a guest composer for our winter season. Ava stared at her as if the words had arrived in another language. I don't. I'm not trained. I've never studied formally. I just write by feeling. And that, the woman said, is what this school has forgotten. You don't need to be anything but what you are. You've already given us something we didn't even realize we'd lost. Ava opened her mouth, closed it again. Her eyes shimmered and her hands twitched at her sides, as if trying to find the gravity that was suddenly missing from the floor beneath her. Daniel stepped forward. You belong here, he said. We all felt it. And in that moment, Ava realized, maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a mistake. Maybe she hadn't wandered into the wrong world after all. Maybe this room, these walls, this piano, they had always been waiting for her. The conservatory smelled different in the morning. Not the sharp tang of varnished wood and echoing formality that had greeted Ava on her first day, but something gentler. Warm light drifting through tall windows, motes of dust suspended like musical notes waiting to be played. It no longer felt like a fortress built to keep people like her out. It felt possible. She moved carefully through the main hall, her shoes, still the same scuffed pair, making soft taps on the marble floor. Students passed her now with curious glances, some offering smiles, others lingering as if debating whether to say something. No one laughed, no one pointed. And when she passed the rehearsal wing, someone even clapped softly, though she never turned to see who. A week had passed since the day the music changed everything. Ava now had a key to a studio. Her name, handprinted in pencil on the door, still made her blink twice every time she saw it, as if someone would come down the corridor, snatch the key from her hand and say there'd been a mistake. But they hadn't, and every day she stepped inside. The room was nothing extravagant. A narrow space with a wooden upright piano, a desk cluttered with blank sheet music, and a rust-colored armchair that creaked when she sat. But it was hers. A space where, for the first time, her music wasn't something she snuck into between obligations or silenced under the weight of survival. It was allowed, expected, even. Still, expectation was a heavier burden than poverty ever was, because now they were listening. Her first assignment as guest composer was to write a full piece for the Winter Gala, set to open the season with something intimate, stirring, and memorable, as the director had said. It would be performed by the very orchestra that once pitied her, and it would open with her name in the program. She hadn't slept in 3 nights. Every time she sat at the piano, her fingers hovered and froze. Not from fear, but from something deeper, something stranger. Doubt had changed shape. It wasn't about whether she was good enough anymore. It was whether she could still write with a heart unshackled now that the world was watching. One morning, she stared at the ivory keys for over an hour. Her reflection in the varnish below looked tired, older. She played 3 notes, stopped, played a 4th, then sighed. And suddenly, the silence broke. I didn't think the girl who silenced a concert hall would be afraid of a blank page. The voice was gentle, amused. She turned. Daniel stood in the doorway, one shoulder leaning on the frame, cello case slung casually behind him. Ava blushed. "You should be rehearsing." "I am," he said, "rehearsing how to convince you to let me play your new piece before anyone else hears it." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I haven't written it." Daniel stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. "Why not?" Ava hesitated. Then in a whisper, "Because I don't know how to write music that lives up to their expectations. Before, no one cared what I played. I was invisible. Now it feels like if I press the wrong note, the whole illusion will collapse." Daniel sat across from her, on the edge of the armchair, elbows on his knees. "Let me tell you something," he said. "I trained at this conservatory for 8 years. I studied in Vienna, played solos in Berlin. I followed every rule, climbed every ladder, and yet not once have I played something that made a room stop breathing the way they did when you played your father's song." She looked at him, startled by the conviction in his voice. "I wasn't trying to do that," she murmured. "Exactly," he said, smiling softly. "That's what made it real." She turned back to the piano. "You know, I used to imagine this moment," she said. "Not the title, not the applause. Just sitting in a room like this with enough light, enough warmth, and a piano that didn't have sticky keys. I thought if I ever made it here, the music would pour out of me." Daniel stood and crossed to the piano. He reached into his coat and pulled something out, a small object wrapped in a velvet cloth. He unwrapped it slowly. A metronome. Old, wooden, worn at the corners. "This belonged to my mother," he said. "She was a pianist too. When I was 5, I'd fall asleep listening to this ticking beside her while she practiced. It's broken now, doesn't tick anymore. But I keep it with me, not because it works, but because of what it reminds me." He placed it gently on the piano beside her. "You don't need to pour music out. You already did. Maybe all you need now is to remember why you started." Ava stared at the metronome, her chest tight. And that night, long after Daniel left, she sat at the piano again. But this time, she didn't try to impress. She didn't chase perfection. She closed her eyes, thought of her father, the way his hands used to shape chords from brokenness, The way his face lit up when she mimicked his melodies. She wrote a single line of music, then another. By sunrise she had a page, then two. By the end of the week the room was covered in melodies, clipped to the wall, laid across the floor, curling off the desk. She barely ate, barely slept, but her heart was alive in every note. And when she played it back to herself, this piece that had taken everything and yet given her back more, her throat caught. She cried, but not from fear this time, from release. The rehearsal hall smelled faintly of rosin, wood polish, and something else, anticipation. The kind that buzzes beneath the skin and sharpens the air. Ava stood at the front, holding trembling sheets of music in both hands, her fingers smudged with graphite. Her eyes traced the staff lines one last time, checking for missing dynamics, for uneven phrasing, for signs that she didn't belong here. The doors creaked open slowly as the musicians filed in, each holding their instruments, some with curiosity, some with uncertainty. Daniel was already seated, cello between his knees, his bow resting lightly across his palm. He caught Ava's eye and gave her the smallest nod, the kind that said, "I believe in this, even if you don't yet." The director sat off to the side, observing quietly, not imposing, but present. Ava stepped forward. "I know some of you have played music that's far more complex than this," she began, her voice clear but delicate. "And I know I'm not trained like you. But this piece, this is the truest thing I've ever written, and I think you'll understand it better with your hearts than your hands." She laid the sheets on each stand herself, one by one, like they were fragile offerings. The room was silent, except for the gentle whisper of paper as it was passed. No one mocked her. No one laughed. But silence carried its own weight. They began with the strings, a slow, almost hesitant progression that wove around a single, repeated piano motif. Ava had written it that way on purpose. Repetition, not as redundancy, but as remembrance, like a lullaby you keep returning to because it feels like home. But not everyone felt it. After the first run-through, a tall clarinetist leaned back in his chair and sighed. "It's pretty, but is it enough?" Another violinist, a younger woman with sharp features, frowned. "It's so spare. There's almost nothing on this page. Are we meant to improvise half the phrasing?" Ava's heart sank. Before she could answer, Daniel cleared his throat. "You're not looking at the page wrong," he said gently. "You're just not hearing it yet." The clarinetist folded his arms. "It's not about hearing. It's about structure. This reads more like poetry than a score." Ava stepped forward, her hands twisting nervously. "It's not meant to overwhelm," she said. "It's meant to settle, to sneak in slowly and remind people of what they've forgotten." It's like she paused, trying to find the word, like someone whispering an apology they waited too long to say. The room shifted. Daniel adjusted the bridge on his cello, then spoke softly. "What if we try it again, this time, without trying to perfect it?" The conductor's podium stood empty. No one had yet replaced Maestro Callahan officially, and so Daniel stood from his seat and moved to the center, not as a leader but as a listener. He looked to Ava. "You'll play?" She hesitated, then nodded. She sat at the piano, the same piano that had once seemed like a stranger. Now it felt like a friend, weathered, wise, and waiting. Her fingers touched the keys gently. The opening melody returned like a memory knocking on the door. And this time, as the orchestra joined in, something changed. The clarinetist's tone softened. The violinist began to lean into the silences. The percussionist, instead of filling space with rhythm, let the quiet linger like snowfall. Ava led them not with authority, but with vulnerability. She wasn't showing off her composition. She was sharing a wound. And slowly, they understood it. The second movement swelled not in grandeur, but in ache. The strings rose like a voice that had stayed silent too long. The piano circled back again and again to the original motif, slightly changed each time, like someone trying to say the same thing in a different way, hoping one version would finally be understood. By the end, the entire room had stilled. And when the last note faded, there was no applause, no immediate commentary, just a shared hush. Then a single sniffle. From the flutist, a quiet man in his 40s, eyes glistening. "My mother used to hum something like that," he said quietly, "when she did the dishes." Ava turned her face slightly away, as if to hide the emotion brimming there. Not because she was ashamed, but because she was overwhelmed. The director stood at last. Her heels echoed as she crossed to Ava, stopping just a few feet away. "You didn't write a concert piece," she said. "You wrote a confession." Ava nodded slowly. "I didn't know how else to do it." The director smiled a little wistfully. "Then don't ever learn another way." She turned to the orchestra. "You'll perform this in 2 weeks. It won't be perfect, and it shouldn't be. I want it raw. I want it human. This piece isn't just part of the gala, it's the soul of it." No one objected. Because somehow, in a room filled with trained musicians and unshakable egos, a once-mocked girl with no credentials had reminded them of something purer than technique, something deeper than brilliance, a truth so quiet it could only be heard through silence. Later, when the others had filed out and the evening light cast golden rectangles across the empty chairs, Ava lingered at the piano. Daniel sat beside her, his cello now packed up, resting against the wall. "You did it," he said softly. "I don't know what I did," she whispered. He looked at her. "You gave us back something we didn't know we'd lost." She turned to him, the room suddenly smaller, warmer. "Do you think," she said slowly, "that my father would have liked it?" Daniel didn't hesitate. He would have wept. She smiled through the sting in her eyes. Then it was worth it. The morning light had a gentler hue the day the posters went up. Pinned to the conservatory's front gates, slipped behind glass in the grand foyer, and propped on easels near the main auditorium, they bore the same striking image. A single piano key in shadow, with the title Memory in C minor etched below like a secret waiting to be shared. Composed by Ava Lorne. Her name, in delicate serif, printed on every program, whispered through every corridor, tucked between announcements and rehearsal rosters like it had always belonged. But Ava still moved like a ghost in the building. Even now, she doubted it. She'd walk past her name and instinctively lower her head, as if afraid someone might suddenly remember she didn't have a degree or a mentor or a legacy. Just the bruised heart of a girl who'd listened to her father breathe beside a broken radiator and turned that rhythm into music. And yet, something inside her was beginning to change. It wasn't confidence, not yet, but it was steadiness. The way a flame, once flickering in uncertainty, began to learn the wind's rhythm and sway with it instead of fighting. The rehearsals grew smoother. The orchestra softened, not just in tone but in presence. They began to look to her now, not Daniel, not the director, for cues on phrasing, feeling, breath. She'd become something they trusted. On the Wednesday before the gala, she was walking across the courtyard, coat wrapped tight against the autumn breeze, when she saw a figure standing just outside the old iron gates. A man, older, gray-bearded, wrapped in a fraying wool scarf. Her heart stopped. "Dad?" He turned, slowly as if unsure whether he was being called or imagined. "Hey, Bird," he said, voice a little cracked from the cold. "Got a minute for an old man with a terrible sense of direction?" She ran to him. They hugged tightly. Not the kind of embrace that comes from relief, but the kind that comes from home. "I told you not to come till the show," she murmured into his shoulder. "Well, I lied," he whispered back. "Sue me." She pulled back to look at him. His eyes, still clouded from the slow, creeping blindness, were damp. "I heard you on the live stream," he said. "They played a snippet on the school's website. I couldn't see you, but I felt every note." She smiled, chest aching. "I wrote it for you," she said. "I know," he replied. "I heard the snow in it, the mornings you used to hum while making toast, the time we fixed that broken string on your first keyboard with a paperclip. It was all there." She swallowed hard. "Let me show you the piano I used," she said. "You can touch it. You'll feel it's not as nice as it looks." He laughed, a warm, gravelly sound. "Neither are most of us." They walked the halls slowly, her guiding him with one hand, his other resting on her shoulder, like a duet of presence and memory. When they reached the auditorium, the room was empty. Sunlight scattered across the stage. She helped him up the stairs, helped him find the bench. His hands ran over the keys with reverence. "Clean," he murmured, "but not too polished. This piano's been played by people who loved it." She sat beside him. "Play it with me?" she asked. He chuckled. "I can't see, remember?" "Doesn't matter," she said. "Just feel it." She played the first notes of Memory in C minor, and he followed, gently, blindly, with 2 trembling hands that remembered the shape of love even when they could no longer trace the light. For 5 minutes, no one else existed. Only them. Father and daughter. Then, as the final notes drifted upward, she rested her head against his shoulder. "Promise me," he said quietly, "that after all of this, after the applause and the pressure and the critics, promise me you'll still play the way you did in that little apartment." She nodded, her eyes closed. "I will." But not everything outside that auditorium was gentle. News had traveled fast about the Winter Gala's new composer. Some celebrated it, praising the conservatory's progressive spirit, its embrace of new voices, its bold reinvention. Others weren't as kind. Ava found anonymous notes in her studio mailbox. "Real composers don't cry on stage. Enjoy your 15 minutes. Your playing is all feeling and no form." She didn't tell her father, didn't tell Daniel. She just kept writing, kept rehearsing. But at night, alone, those words clung to her skin like wet clothes. Then, the morning before the final dress rehearsal, she walked into the practice room and stopped cold. Sitting at her piano, uninvited, was a man she thought she'd never see again. Maestro Callahan. He looked different now, less armor, more shadow. His eyes still sharp, but no longer cutting. He stood as she entered, buttoning his coat. "I heard your piece," he said. "Well, I heard about your piece." Ava said nothing. He stepped closer, leaving a polite distance. "You deserve credit," he admitted. "You moved people, made them weep, even. That's something." She folded her arms, still silent. "I was wrong to dismiss you," he continued, "but I wasn't wrong about everything." She raised an eyebrow. "You're leading with feeling, and that's beautiful. But beware. Feelings fade. Technique doesn't. The world will love you when you're raw, but they'll devour you when you grow." She looked him in the eyes, calm and unflinching. "Then let them." He studied her a moment longer, then nodded, not with approval, but with reluctant respect. He walked past her, pausing only once. "If you ever want real training, I can still teach you." She didn't respond until he was at the door. "You had your chance to teach me," she said. "You chose instead to humiliate me. Now, I've learned how to sing on my own." He left without another word. And Ava sat down at the piano, not to practice, but to remember. This wasn't about revenge. This was about resilience. Tomorrow, her music would speak not just for herself, but for everyone who'd been told they weren't enough. The night of the gala arrived like a breath held too long. The conservatory, normally reserved and scholarly, had transformed into something almost cinematic. Velvet ropes lined the marble staircases. Candles flickered in tall glass cylinders at every corner of the entrance hall. Faculty in dark gowns and suits moved with practiced elegance, while donors and dignitaries murmured behind programs embossed with gold lettering. And at the center of it all, Ava stood at the edge of the backstage curtain, her hands folded in front of her, eyes fixed on the slow sweep of the chandelier-lit audience. Her breath came in shallow tides. The hem of her dress, simple, navy, borrowed from a friend of the director's, brushed her ankles like a whisper of encouragement. She had never seen a room so full, every seat occupied, every space between filled with anticipation. She scanned the front row. The director was there. Daniel, too, his cello case at his feet, posture tall and composed. A few faculty members sat beside them. And then, her gaze landed on a man with silver-framed glasses, sitting silently in the fourth seat from the center aisle. His coat was wool, his fingers folded neatly over his lap. His eyes were clouded, but his face, her heart squeezed. Her father. He gave the smallest smile, barely a movement, but it was enough. Ava turned from the curtain, retreating into the shadows where her breathing could be hers again. The hum of the hall was distant now, muted, as if someone had covered the world in velvet. Daniel found her there moments later, dressed in black, bow in hand. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm terrified," she whispered. He smiled. "Good. That means you care." She laughed softly, the sound tight and nervous. "I keep thinking I'll trip walking to the piano," she said, "or sit down and forget every note." Daniel leaned closer. "Then let your fear play with you, not against you. Don't chase perfection. Just tell the truth. That's what you've always done best." She nodded slowly. "I'm glad it's you up there with me. Always." They clasped hands for a second, not romantically, not ceremonially, just as two artists who understood the weight of what was about to happen. When her name was announced, a quiet settled over the room. She stepped into the light. The applause was kind, warm, not explosive, the kind given to someone who'd earned presence, if not yet reverence. She took her place at the piano, adjusted the bench. ran her fingers along the keys like greeting an old friend. The orchestra tuned behind her, the soft chorus of strings and winds swelling for a moment, then vanishing into breathless silence. She nodded once and began. The first notes were light, almost fragile. They fluttered like candlelight in a room filled with wind. The strings followed slowly, gentle and reverent. Ava closed her eyes, letting the music guide her hands, not the other way around. The piece unfolded in 3 movements, each a memory stitched into melody. The first, winter mornings in that tiny apartment, her father humming while boiling water for tea, the sound of a bus pulling away outside, the faint creak of old floorboards beneath her feet. The second, the lonely nights when the piano was her only company, when hunger taught her restraint and the ghosts of missed chances whispered lullabies she never sang aloud. And the third, that day in the auditorium. The mockery, the hush. The moment the music bled through her trembling fingers and offered the room something it didn't know it needed. It wasn't a flawless performance. One note came too early, another sustained a beat too long, but it didn't matter, because the room didn't breathe. And as the final note rang, not loud but clear and aching, she lifted her fingers slowly, letting the silence settle like snow on an untouched street. Then, something unexpected. No applause, just stillness. Then a sniffle. Then another. And then, rising like a wave, a standing ovation that shook the wooden floors and climbed the velvet walls. Ava stood, dazed, breathless. The director's eyes shimmered with tears. Daniel looked at her like someone watching a sunrise no one believed would come. And her father, he had stood too. Hands trembling slightly, head bowed. He couldn't see the standing crowd, couldn't read the program, couldn't follow a single written note. But he had felt the room, felt the air shift, felt his daughter take the world by its heart. A staff member helped him backstage, where Ava met him just beyond the curtain. She flew into his arms before he could even speak. "I didn't miss a second," he whispered into her hair. "I was so scared," she breathed. "I almost couldn't breathe out there." "But you did," he murmured. "You made them feel what I've always known, that your music isn't something you play. It's something you give." She cried then, not from fear, not from pressure, from release. The director approached minutes later, her heels echoing softly on the wood, her expression unreadable until she reached them. "That," she said, voice firm but glinting with pride, "was not just the highlight of the gala. That was history." Ava looked down, humbled. "Thank you," she whispered. "No," the director said. "Thank you. You didn't just compose music, you reminded this institution why it exists." Ava stood there, surrounded by applause still echoing through the stone, by warmth she'd once believed belonged only to others, by the man who taught her to feel music before understanding it. And somewhere deep inside, she finally began to believe that this moment, this strange, glorious, overwhelming moment, wasn't a dream she'd wake up from. It was her life, and it had only just begun. 3 days after the gala, Ava's name lit up places she never expected to see it. An online arts magazine called her the girl who wrote silence into music. Another described her composition as a haunting hymn to resilience. Her inbox, once a lonely stretch of system notifications and unanswered job inquiries, now overflowed. Invitations to guest lectures, performance requests, even a message from a documentary filmmaker requesting an interview. She hadn't answered any of them. Not yet. The morning after the performance, she'd taken the train home with her father, where the air smelled of old books and steeped tea. And the silence between them was the kind only people who loved each other deeply could share without unease. They didn't talk about the performance at first. They just sat in the small living room, the couch springs groaning beneath them, an old radio playing a Chopin nocturne in the background. The world felt strangely quiet again. And she clung to that hush like a child who had just stepped out of a storm. When she finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "Was it real?" Her father smiled without turning. "You mean, did you dream it?" She nodded, eyes glassy. He chuckled. "No dream ever felt that heavy in your chest." She rested her head against his shoulder, just like she used to. "But now what?" she murmured. "Now that it's over." He turned to face her, his blind eyes somehow still seeing more than most. "Sweetheart, it's not over. You've just walked through the first door. The hallway ahead is long, beautiful, messy, but you've already proved you can walk through it with grace." She closed her eyes, letting those words settle into her ribcage like something warm and steady. But the hallway he spoke of began faster than she was ready for. By the end of the week, the conservatory's administration had extended her residency. A symphony in Boston requested she compose something for spring. A famous pianist, one she'd once idolized on grainy YouTube clips, asked if she'd be open to co-creating a duet. She barely had time to process any of it. One morning, she found herself being ushered into a quiet back room with soft lighting and a camera crew. Her first official interview. A young woman with a smooth voice and kind eyes welcomed her with practiced ease. "We're thrilled to meet you, Ava. The world wants to know who you are, what you believe, how you did what you did." Ava smiled shyly, folding her hands in her lap. The interview began softly. Questions about her childhood, her influences, her father. But slowly, the interviewer leaned forward with a tilt of the head, voice dipping into something more provocative. "There's been some talk," she said delicately, "that the conservatory replaced Maestro Callahan too swiftly, that perhaps the institution overcorrected to appear progressive." Ava's breath caught. She hadn't expected it. "Not like this." The interviewer continued. "Do you think your success is partly symbolic? That you've become a face for something larger than your music?" Ava sat still, her fingers locked together, heart suddenly thudding. Her mind spun with 1,000 ways to answer. All of them dangerous. But then she remembered Daniel's words. "Don't chase perfection. Just tell the truth." So she did. "I never asked to be a symbol," she said, voice quiet but unwavering. "And I don't want to be one. I just wanted to be heard. Not for what I represent, but for what I wrote. And if what I wrote reminded people that music should feel like something, then I'm proud of that. Not because it's political, but because it's human." The room stilled. The interviewer nodded slowly, visibly moved. "Thank you." Afterward, Ava walked the conservatory grounds alone. The first leaves of winter had begun to fall, brittle and golden. The breeze carried a hush that reminded her of unfinished lullabies. But it was in that quiet that doubt crept in again. Subtle, like a shadow walking just behind her. What if she'd already peaked? What if everything from now on was comparison? What if the very thing that made her special, her rawness, her innocence, couldn't survive exposure? She sat on a bench beneath an old elm, the cold seeping into her coat. A group of students passed by, whispering her name with awe, and she forced a smile. But inside she felt like a song unfinished. Later that evening she returned to the studio, hoping to find comfort in the familiar creak of the floor, the familiar warmth of the upright piano. But when she sat and placed her hands on the keys, nothing came. No melody, no whisper, just a void. She played the first bar of Memory in C minor, but it felt hollow, as if she were mimicking herself. She stopped, head bowed. The silence that once soothed her now felt accusing. She didn't cry, she couldn't. The tears wouldn't come, as if even they were unsure whether to mourn or to wait. That's when she heard the knock. 3 soft taps. Daniel peeked in, eyes gentle. "Bad night?" She didn't answer, just gestured at the keys with a weak smile. He walked over, sat beside her. "You're allowed to be lost," he said. "I don't know how to follow that piece," she confessed. "Everyone's waiting for the next miracle." "You don't owe them miracles," he replied. "You owe them honesty, and that doesn't always come on demand." She looked at him, eyes searching. "What if it's gone?" He shook his head. "No, your gift doesn't disappear. It just rests, like breath between notes." She exhaled shakily. "I'm scared, Daniel." "I know," he said, "but I've never seen someone face fear with more grace than you." He reached into his bag and pulled out 2 mugs of cocoa. "No answers in this," he said, handing one to her. "Just warmth." They sat together in the silence, sipping slowly, the piano between them like an old friend who didn't mind being quiet tonight. Outside, the wind picked up, leaves scattered against the window. But inside that small room, there was peace, even without music. Sometimes Ava would learn, the most powerful note is the one held back. And in that pause, in that space between one triumph and whatever comes next, something invisible grows. Not applause, not fame, but endurance. The letter came on a Tuesday, folded neatly in an ivory envelope with embossed edges and a golden seal pressed in wax. It sat untouched for almost an hour on Ava's studio desk, tucked between a stack of chord sketches and a coffee-stained music journal. She knew, even before she opened it, that it wasn't ordinary. Not with paper that thick. Not with ink that shimmered when it caught the light. When she finally unsealed it, her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of something she couldn't yet name. It was an invitation. To Paris. A world-renowned symphony was commissioning a new work to close their summer series. They wanted something intimate, something human, something that could hold its own in the historic Salle Pleyel, where echoes of Debussy and Chopin still lingered in the walls. And they wanted her to write it. Not next year, not later, now. The deadline was just 6 weeks away. 6 weeks to write for an audience of purists, scholars, and critics. 6 weeks to meet expectations that had already outgrown her. She reread the letter twice, then again. The thrill it brought was quiet. Not a scream, not a celebration, just the low hum of disbelief, the kind that begins in the chest and spreads slowly, filling you like the opening bars of a hymn. And yet, under that thrill was something colder, a question she couldn't silence. Would they want her music? Or a version of her that was more polished, more intellectual, more acceptable? She didn't tell anyone about the letter right away. Not even Daniel. Not her father. She tucked it back in the envelope and slid it into her desk drawer, beneath a worn scarf and a broken metronome. That night, she walked alone down the city's old cobblestone path near the river, where street musicians played for coins and kindness. A boy no older than 12 was plunking out a lopsided melody on a battered upright, smiling like he'd just discovered the sky had a song. She stood and listened. Not because the music was brilliant, it wasn't, but because it was alive. He saw her watching and grinned. "You play?" he asked. She hesitated, then smiled faintly. Sometimes. He patted the bench beside him. She sat. They didn't speak again. She just followed his crooked rhythm, turned it into something tender, something that wrapped around his rough chords like silk ribbon. People stopped. A few clapped. A few tossed coins. But for her, none of it mattered. What mattered was the boy's face when they finished. Eyes wide, amazed that someone heard his noise and called it music. That night, Ava returned to her apartment and sat at the piano for hours. Not composing, not rehearsing, just remembering. She finally pulled the letter from the drawer. And the next morning, she went to see the director. The office smelled of leather-bound volumes and black tea. Sunlight poured in through tall windows. The director sat in her usual chair, reading glasses low on her nose. Ava handed her the letter silently. The woman read it, her expression giving nothing away. When she finished, she looked up slowly. "They're serious," she said. Ava nodded. "They are." "And?" "I don't know what they want from me," Ava whispered. "I don't know if they want the girl who played her father's lullaby or someone else, someone cleaner, louder, more curated." The director leaned forward. "Do you know what you want?" Ava hesitated. "I want to keep writing, but I don't want to lose the voice that got me here." The director took off her glasses, folding them with care. Then protected Ava. "Fame will offer you everything, but ask for your soul in return. Make sure you never trade one for the other." Ava blinked, her throat tight. "You think I should go?" "I think if you can write something in Paris that still sounds like you, then the world deserves to hear it." That night, she told her father. They sat on the old couch again, just like after the gala, her head on his shoulder. He didn't react the way she expected. He didn't gasp, didn't shout, didn't smile wide and say, "You've made it." He just reached for her hand. "You've already made it," he said. "You found your truth and shared it. The rest of this, Paris, applause, stages, it's beautiful, but it's not the goal." She looked at him, eyes soft. "What is the goal?" He squeezed her hand gently. "To still be proud of what you wrote, even when no one's clapping." 2 days later, Ava boarded a plane. The sky outside the window was endless and blue, stretching toward something she couldn't quite see yet, but believed in all the same. She landed in Paris just before dawn. The city was still asleep as she rode in a quiet car past the Seine, the Eiffel Tower a silhouette in the mist. But the world didn't feel overwhelming. It felt open. Her apartment was small. Just one window and a rickety desk, but the upright piano tucked in the corner was tuned and waiting. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She unpacked a photograph of her father, a copy of Memory in C minor, and a small jar of tea leaves from home. She didn't unpack her fears. They had traveled with her anyway. For the first few days, she walked the streets, listened to buskers, wrote in coffee shops, let the rhythm of the city seep into her. And then, on the 6th morning, she woke early, made tea, lit a candle, and sat down to compose. She didn't try to sound French, didn't try to impress. She just told another story, in melody. And it sounded nothing like the last one, but it still sounded like her. The Parisian sky on the evening of Ava's performance was a shade of gray that shimmered like pearl, neither light nor dark, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. Inside the Salle Pleyel, the world stirred. Velvet seats filled row by row. Voices floated across the balconies, laced with French and German and Italian, critics, composers, curious socialites. Some carried notebooks, some opera glasses, some simply expectation. Ava stood alone in the dressing room. The walls were tall and pale, the ceiling ornate. A single mirror, framed in gold leaf, reflected her nervous silhouette. She wore a deep burgundy gown, the kind that fell like quiet confidence over her frame. Her hair was swept back with soft curls tumbling free at her neck, and though she looked like a picture of poise, her heartbeat begged otherwise. On the piano stool beside her sat a folded scarf, her father's. She'd kept it with her since she left. It still smelled faintly of cedar and winter. Her hands trembled, but not out of fear of playing. This fear was different. It was the fear of being misunderstood. Because the piece she had written here in Paris, it wasn't what they were expecting. It wasn't dramatic or virtuosic or thunderous. It was sparse, imperfect, quiet in a language that didn't beg to be heard, but asked gently to be felt, and she knew what that might mean. She heard the knock just moments before she was meant to take her place. A stagehand. "There's someone asking for you," he said, half in English, half in French. She blinked. "Now?" "I told him you were preparing, but he said it was urgent." Ava frowned. "Who?" The stagehand hesitated, then shrugged. "He said you'd know. He's seated in the audience, but left this." He held out a folded sheet of music. She reached for it slowly. Her name was scribbled across the top. But the handwriting wasn't hers. It was jagged, familiar, proud. Her fingers froze. It was Maestro Neither in their name, hastily written in sharp ink, were just a few words. "One day I will say I heard it first. No apology, no flattery, but enough." She closed her eyes. She had not spoken to him since that brief, uncomfortable visit in her studio. He had returned to Europe, rumor said, to teach privately and reflect. She hadn't expected him to show up. Certainly not here. But something in his note grounded her. Not because it was kind, but because it reminded her of the journey, of how far she had walked barefoot on shards of doubt, of how many doors she'd been told were closed, and how she had opened them anyway. She tucked the note beneath her father's scarf, then rose. When she stepped out into the lights of the concert hall, the room went still. She walked slowly, her shoes clicking softly across polished wood. The grand piano waited beneath a single spotlight, no conductor, no introduction, only her. She sat, breathed, placed her fingers on the keys, and let go. The music that followed was not impressive by design. It was memory woven into sound. It opened with a dissonant harmony, like someone fumbling for their voice in a room where no one listens. The melody that followed was hesitant, searching, like a child's footsteps on uneven ground. And then, something unexpected. The orchestra didn't rise in triumph, it murmured, it echoed her restraint. The second movement whispered a story of loneliness, the kind of ache found in tea gone cold and letters never sent. Notes hung in the air like questions without answers. But in the third movement, hope arrived. Quietly, a simple piano progression repeated again and again, each time with more light, more breath, more truth. Not because she wanted to impress them, but because she wanted to show them that beauty wasn't something you commanded, it was something you uncovered. The final note faded into a silence so pure, it felt holy. No one moved. Then, slowly, one by one, the room rose. No ovation, not yet, just standing, still, honoring. And then the applause came, not loud at first, but steady. Grown from reverence, not spectacle. Ava rose, bowed, and through the sea of strangers, her eyes landed on a familiar figure seated near the back. Daniel, he was there. She didn't know how he'd gotten there, didn't know when he'd flown, but he was standing too, hands in his pockets, eyes shining. Later, backstage, he found her. She didn't speak, just walked into his arms. "You didn't tell me you were coming," she whispered against his chest. "I didn't want you to look for me," he replied. "I wanted you to look inward." She pulled back, her face tired but glowing. You think they understood it? Daniel smiled. I think they felt it, and that's more than understanding. She nodded, but something lingered in her expression. He noticed. What? She hesitated. They offered me a place here, a residency, a full season. His smile faltered for a breath. Wow, that's incredible. I haven't said yes. Why not? She looked away. Because I'm scared that if I stay, I'll become what they want me to be. Not what I am. He stepped closer. Ava, wherever you go, you bring that honesty with you. It's not geography that changes you. It's forgetting why you started. She took that in, slowly, like a note held long enough to make the room listen. I don't want to forget, she said. Then don't. She stared down at her hands. Come back with me? She asked quietly. Daniel tilted his head. To the conservatory? No, she said, looking up, her voice steady. Home. He smiled, the kind of smile that holds more than words. Always. And so, the girl who once sat at the edge of the world afraid to play a single note had traveled halfway across it and come back with something greater than fame. She returned with her music intact, and with someone who believed in her, not for the light she stood in now, but for the light she carried when the world was still dark. The air back home was different. Softer, slower. It carried the scent of cracked pavement after rain, of magnolia trees just beginning to bloom along the edges of quiet streets. Life didn't rush here. It remembered. It lingered. Ava walked the familiar path to the conservatory with Daniel beside her, their steps unhurried, their laughter occasional but full. Her name was no longer whispered in surprise. It was spoken with warmth, with pride. It had been nearly a year since her performance in Paris, and though she'd turned down the residency offer, she hadn't turned away from music. She'd simply turned inward again, not to hide, but to rediscover. The conservatory had asked her to teach part-time. She hesitated at first, not because she didn't want to, but because she was afraid she might not know how. But the moment she sat beside a trembling student and placed their hands gently over the keys, everything returned. Not the fame, not the pressure, the why. And that was everything. Her classroom was tucked in the old wing of the building, where the windows stuck in winter and the floors groaned with every footstep. She didn't mind. The grand piano had character. The chairs were always a little mismatched, and the walls had grown thick with the sound of young hands trying and failing and trying again. She always started her lessons the same way. Don't play to impress me, she'd say. Play to remember something. One afternoon, as golden light spilled through the blinds, a boy came in late. He was shy, dark curls covering his eyes, carrying sheet music folded so many times it looked like a paper napkin. He sat in the corner, away from the other students, and waited quietly until class ended. As the others filed out, Ava approached. You didn't play today, she said softly. The boy shrugged. I'm not good enough. She smiled. Neither was I. He looked up, confused. But you're you. I wasn't always. He hesitated, then slowly opened his music. I tried to write something, he murmured, but it's probably wrong. She unfolded it gently. Her breath caught. The first 4 measures, they were hers. The opening phrase of Memory in C minor, altered slightly, but still unmistakably hers. And from there, the boy had built something new, his own notes, his own rhythm. A continuation. She looked at him, eyes shining. Where did you hear this? My mom played it once. She said it saved her once when she was really sad. I found a video. I listened. I tried to understand. Ava turned her gaze back to the page. You did more than understand, she whispered. You remembered. She sat beside him. May I? The boy nodded. She played the first notes of his version. Slowly, carefully, he joined her. Their 2 voices, hers seasoned and steady, his trembling and brave, wove together in a delicate, imperfect harmony. When they finished, the silence that followed was full, not of awe, of meaning, of legacy. She placed a hand gently over his. You don't have to be perfect, she said. You just have to be honest. He smiled, and something inside Ava settled. Later that evening, as she packed her things, she found herself alone in the studio. She sat at the piano once more, fingers dancing softly over the keys. Not composing, not preparing, just playing, for herself, and for her father, who had passed quietly in his sleep a few months earlier, his scarf still folded on the piano bench at home, his record player still spinning the same old nocturnes. She missed him, but when she played, he felt near. Outside, the stars began to appear, one by one, against a fading indigo sky. The world she knew now would always be too loud, too fast, too hungry for something new. But here, in this quiet corner, she could still play the truth. She could still teach others how to hold silence in their hands and turn it into song. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest music of all. Sometimes, the most extraordinary voices come from the most overlooked corners. Ava wasn't born into privilege. She had no pedigree, no formal training, no polished accolades to her name, only a deep, aching truth and a piano that understood her silence. But when the world laughed, when it mocked her dreams and belittled her voice, she didn't shout back. She played. This story reminds us that real power doesn't come from prestige or perfection. It comes from honesty, from remembering why we began, from daring to stay soft in a world that rewards sharp edges. Ava taught us that you don't need to be loud to be heard, that music and life isn't about performance but presence, and that when we stay true to our voice, even in the face of judgment, we don't just survive, we transform. So if you've ever felt small, invisible, unqualified, remember this: your story matters, your voice matters, and the quiet truths you carry may just be the melody that helps someone else find their own. Keep playing, even if your hands shake, even if the room laughs, because one day they won't just listen, they'll rise to their feet and remember.